My husband said at a family dinner that he's unhappy in our marriage. When I confronted him later, he said I was overreacting. But then I discovered the real reason he wanted everyone to hear it. I've been married to my husband, Daniel, for 7 years. We met in our late 20s, he was 28, and I was 27. Now, at 35 and 36, we've built what I thought was a solid life together. We have no kids yet, but we always talked about starting a family in the near future. On the outside, we seemed like a happy, stable couple. Of course, like any marriage, we had our ups and downs, but nothing ever made me doubt Daniel's commitment or our love. That's why what happened at that family dinner completely blindsided me. Daniel has always been a reserved person, someone who keeps his emotions in check, especially around others. So when we were invited to his parents' house for a casual family dinner, I expected it to be the usual: his parents, his younger sister, and her fiancé, some easy conversation, and a relaxing evening. Everything seemed normal at first. We ate, we talked, we laughed. But then, in the middle of a conversation about relationships and marriage, Daniel said something that made my heart stop. His sister, Claire, was talking about her upcoming wedding, and their mother made a comment about how important it was to keep the spark alive in marriage. That's when Daniel, with no warning, no hesitation, and in the most casual tone, said, "Well, it's not always that easy. I mean, I'm not exactly happy in my marriage." The room went completely silent. I felt like all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. My fork was halfway to my mouth, and I just froze. Everyone else seemed equally stunned, looking back and forth between us. His mom nervously laughed, as if waiting for him to say he was joking. But he wasn't. He just kept eating like he hadn't just shattered my reality in front of his entire family. I forced myself to keep my expression neutral. I didn't want to make a scene, but inside, my mind was racing. Where was this coming from? We hadn't had any major fights recently. No big issues, at least. None that I was aware of. If he was unhappy, why hadn't he told me in private? Why was I hearing about it at the same time as his family? Claire, who has never been one to hold back, was the first to break the silence. "Wait, what? Since when?" she asked, her eyes darting between Daniel and me. Daniel just shrugged. "I don't know. Things just feel off, I guess." I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. But what was I supposed to say? That I had no idea my own husband felt this way? That I was just as shocked as they were? I forced a small smile and said, "I wasn't aware you felt that way, Daniel." He didn't even look at me. "It's nothing dramatic," he said, still eating. "I just think marriage is harder than people realize." His mother, clearly uncomfortable, quickly changed the subject, and the conversation moved on, but I couldn't. I spent the rest of the dinner in a daze, nodding and smiling at the right moments, but my mind was stuck on his words. "I'm not exactly happy in my marriage." As soon as we got in the car to leave, I turned to him. "What was that?" My voice was calm, but inside, I was anything but. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "What was what?" I stared at him. "Daniel, you just told your entire family that you're unhappy in our marriage. And this is the first I'm hearing about it." He exhaled sharply. "It wasn't a big deal. I didn't mean it in some extreme way. You're blowing this out of proportion." I felt a lump rise in my throat. "How's that not a big deal? Do you even realize how humiliating it was to hear that at the same time as your mom, your sister, everyone?" He shook his head, looking frustrated. "I was just making conversation. It wasn't some big confession." I wanted to believe him, but something felt off. The way he had said it, so effortlessly, so casually. It didn't seem like a slip of the tongue. It felt deliberate. But why? I didn't push further that night. I needed time to process what had just happened. But deep down, I knew this wasn't something I could just ignore. If he was truly unhappy, I needed to understand why. And if he wasn't, then why did he want everyone to think he was? What I didn't know then was that this was only the beginning. The real truth behind Daniel's words was something I never saw coming. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the dinner in my head, dissecting Daniel's words, his tone, his complete lack of awareness about how much his comment had hurt me. Was he truly unhappy? And if so, why hadn't he said anything before? By the next morning, I knew I had to bring it up again. I couldn't just let this sit, pretending everything was fine when my husband had just publicly admitted to being dissatisfied in our marriage. So, over breakfast, I tried again. "Daniel, I need you to be honest with me," I said, keeping my voice even. "What you said last night, was it just a careless comment, or do you really feel that way?" He sighed, setting down his coffee. "I told you, you're overthinking it. It wasn't some grand declaration. I just meant that marriage isn't always perfect." I studied him carefully. He looked annoyed, not guilty or sad, just annoyed that I was pressing the issue. "Daniel," I pressed, "if you're unhappy, I need to know. We need to talk about it, not just have it slip out at a dinner like some offhand remark." His jaw tightened, and for a second, I thought he was going to shut down completely. But then he exhaled sharply and said, "Look, I didn't mean to hurt you. But yeah, sometimes I feel stuck." That word hit me like a punch to the stomach. Stuck? In what way? He ran a hand through his hair, avoiding my gaze. "I don't know. It's like we're just going through the motions. Every day feels the same. I wake up, go to work, come home, we eat dinner, watch TV, go to bed, repeat. There's no excitement anymore." I swallowed hard. "So, you're bored?" He hesitated before nodding. "I guess, yeah. Bored." My husband wasn't deeply unhappy. He wasn't struggling with resentment or regret. He was just bored. I wasn't sure whether that made me feel better or worse. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "If you feel like we're stuck in a routine, why not talk to me about it instead of dropping it in front of your entire family?" His fingers drummed on the table. Because I didn't even realize how much it was bothering me until I said it out loud. I wasn't planning to bring it up, I just did. That didn't sit right with me. It felt too convenient, like an excuse. But I let it go for the moment, knowing I needed to process this before pushing further. For the next few days, I tried to shake off the conversation, but something still gnawed at me. Daniel's dissatisfaction, his detachment, it felt like a symptom, not the root cause. And then I started noticing things I hadn't before. He was on his phone a lot more than usual, texting someone late at night when he thought I wasn't paying attention. He was suddenly working late more often, even though I knew his workload hadn't changed. He was distracted, distant, almost like he was somewhere else entirely. One night, I decided to test something. While we were watching TV, I casually leaned in and asked, "So, who have you been texting so much lately?" His reaction was immediate, too immediate. His whole body stiffened before he forced a casual shrug. "Just work stuff." I tilted my head. "At 11 at night?" He didn't meet my eyes. "You know how it is. Some projects run late." I nodded slowly, but my gut was screaming that something wasn't right. Daniel was lying to me, I was sure of it. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I waited until he was in the shower, and I checked his phone. What I found changed everything. There weren't any messages in his texts, at least, not ones he hadn't deleted. But I noticed a name in his recent calls that stood out, Maya. I knew exactly who she was. Maya was a coworker of his, someone he had mentioned in passing a few times, but never in any significant way. Yet there she was, listed in his call history multiple times over the past week. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. My hands were shaking, but I clicked on his call log, scrolling back. Her name appeared again and again. Late at night. During lunch breaks. Even while he was working late. I could barely breathe. Was this just a harmless friendship? Was I jumping to conclusions? Or was this the real reason behind Daniel's sudden dissatisfaction with our marriage? I placed the phone back exactly as I had found it and sat on the bed, my mind racing. If I confronted him now, he'd just deny it, tell me I was paranoid. I needed more than a call log. I needed the truth. So I made a decision. I was going to find out exactly what was going on. And this time, I wouldn't let him brush me off. Because something was definitely wrong. And I wasn't going to ignore it any longer. For the next few days, I acted as if nothing had changed, but inside, I was a mess. I kept playing different scenarios in my head, trying to figure out what Daniel and Maya's relationship really was. I didn't want to assume the worst, but the late-night calls, the secrecy, and the sudden dissatisfaction with our marriage, it all pointed to something more than just harmless friendship. I knew confronting him without evidence would get me nowhere. He would deny, deflect, and make me feel like I was overreacting, just like he did after the family dinner. So I decided to dig deeper. The first thing I did was check our phone records online. My hands were shaking as I logged in, scrolling through the list of calls. Maya's number appeared over and over, sometimes multiple times a day. Some calls lasted only a few minutes, but others stretched for an hour or more. And the worst part? The longest calls were made late at night on nights when I had gone to bed before him, thinking he was just unwinding after work. My stomach twisted. This wasn't nothing. This wasn't just a work friend. Something was going on. The next step was seeing things for myself. The following evening, Daniel told me he'd be working late again. Instead of staying home and wondering, I drove to his office and parked across the street, watching the entrance. I felt ridiculous, like some suspicious wife in a bad movie, but I needed to know. An hour passed and then I saw him. He walked out of the building not alone, but with Maya. They stood on the sidewalk talking, and then she laughed, touching his arm lightly. He didn't pull away. Instead, he smiled in a way I hadn't seen in months. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to storm over and demand answers, but I held myself back. If I confronted him now, he'd say it was innocent, that they were just colleagues. But this wasn't how coworkers looked at each other. I drove home, my mind racing. When he walked through the door an hour later, I pretended to be half asleep on the couch. "How was work?" I asked casually, watching his face. "Busy," he said, rubbing his neck. "Just a long night." Lie. I knew I had two options. I could wait for more proof, or I could force the truth out of him now. I chose the latter. "I know about Maya," I said, my voice steady. His entire body stiffened. "What?" "I know you've been talking to her late at night. I know you leave work at the same time, and I know you haven't been honest with me." His face paled, and for the first time, he looked genuinely caught off guard. "You're checking up on me now?" He tried to sound angry, but there was panic in his eyes. "I wouldn't have to if you weren't hiding things," I shot back. "So tell me the truth, Daniel. What's really going on?" He exhaled sharply, rubbing his face. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." He hesitated too long. "Are you having an affair?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me then, and in that moment, I knew the answer before he even said a word. "No," he said, but it wasn't immediate. It wasn't firm. It wasn't convincing. Then why all the secrecy? Why the late-night calls, the meetings outside of work? Why tell your family you're unhappy in our marriage? My voice was rising now, my composure slipping. "What were you trying to do, Daniel? Prepare them for when you leave me?" His face twisted with something: guilt, regret, or maybe just the realization that he had been caught. "I'm not leaving you," he said. "But I don't know if I'm happy anymore." The words should have shattered me, but at that moment, they only confirmed what I already knew. "And Maya?" I pushed. He looked down. "She listens. She makes me feel understood." That was all I needed to hear. I stood up, my entire body trembling. "So that's it then? You don't talk to me. You don't try to fix things with me. You just run to her." "It's not like that," he said quickly. "I never cheated, I swear." "But you wanted to." Silence. That silence told me everything. I walked past him, straight to our bedroom, and started packing a bag. He followed, panic creeping into his voice. "What are you doing? What does it look like?" I said coldly. "I'm leaving." "Wait, can't we talk about this?" he pleaded. "I never meant to hurt you. I don't even know how things got this far." I stopped, looking at him one last time. "You got this far because you never talked to me. You just let yourself drift away, and instead of fighting for us, you let someone else take my place." Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I grabbed my bag and walked out. As I closed the door behind me, I felt something unexpected relief. Because for the first time in weeks, I had clarity. Daniel had made his choice, whether he realized it or not. And now, I was making mine. I wasn't going to stay and wonder. I wasn't going to beg him to love me again. I was walking away from someone who had already let me go,